good morning, and our guest this morning on Our Stories is Jane Spires. Jane's going to share with us about her daughter Laura and what she brought to the family. But first, we're going to start with asking you to tell us a little bit about your married life prior to Laura coming into your family.
Okay. Well, my husband and I dated for 2 years while we were students at Millikan and decided that we really needed to get married. So we made all these plans, and we married in 1957 in June, and I was going to work and put him through school, and then he was going to work and help me finish school. He had 1.5 years and I had 2 years to go. But all of our plans kind of went down the drain. We married in June, and in August I got pregnant, and that wasn't part of the plan. But it turned out to be a blessing because I had some issues being pregnant and needed to quit my job. And during that time, we decided that I would be a stay-at-home mom and raise this baby, which turned out to be Becky. And she was a delight. She was easygoing, like her dad, and I could take her anywhere with a book and a few toys, and she'd sit in a corner and amuse herself, and she was quite unusual, and we had a great 4 years together before we decided to have a second child.
So, Becky kind of spoiled you a little bit.
I had no idea.
Yeah, okay. All right, so, but Laura comes along, and the birth and all seems to go without any real complications, and you're initially feeling like, okay, another normal child with,
Right.
Normal issues and
Right.
so forth.
Well,
and when did your sense of maybe that's not quite the way things are, when did that begin to change?
well, Laura was born in December of 1963, and we had a pediatrician, and he seemed to think she was fine and didn't have any problems until she was 3 months old, and she had a seizure. And she had a grand mal seizure, and 3 months after that, she had another seizure at 6 months. And again, the pediatrician seemed to think that some children just have seizures when they're young, particularly if they have a fever, a febrile seizure. So we weren't too bent out of shape about those seizures.
But then she has a third seizure, and that changes everything.
One of the reasons we weren't bent out of shape because Grandma Rex's mother, Grandma Spires, was babysitting, and she remembered that Rex's nephew Malcolm had had seizures as a baby, and so that helped us not panic. Exactly. My parents were visiting. We'd been to church. It was a Sunday, and Laura had a third seizure, and it wasn't like the first two. And so I was trying to be really cool, and this seizure didn't stop. So, of course, we got on the phone. We met the doctor at the ER, and the seizure continued, and what I knew later was that they had her in critical condition because it lasted 4 hours. And then, of course, she was hospitalized, and that following week, it seemed like every day she had seizures. And we were very confused about all of that. the best thing that happened during that week was we met Dr. Clarence Glenn. Dr. Glenn was a saint. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he talked to us about medications, and of course during that week that she was having seizures daily. They were trying medications, and the reason I think he's a saint, he gave me his telephone number, and he told me I could call day or night. And it was unusual for a child to have that many seizures that often.
Yeah.
And so he was a great addition in our family.
But I'm assuming that there was some medication then that did bring some control to the seizures.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But she still had daily seizures.
I guess when she was about 2, you met with the doctor and talked about things kind of across the board, not
Right,
just the seizures.
right. Now, this was in the 60s, and I'm going to say I think we used the word retarded. It was before developmentally disabled, politically correct terms. Dr. Glenn called us in, she was about 2 years old, and sat Rex and me down and said, you probably know this, but we need to talk. The medications and her constant seizures are causing her not to develop normally. And so you're going to have a child with special needs. And that was pretty big news to both of us to finally say that.
Right.
But I can remember this so clearly. We lived 4 blocks from church, and I was in the choir, and very soon after he told us that news, I remember walking to church and talking to God and saying, God, I don't know. I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I'm up to this. And I felt like God said back to me, yes, you can. And you're not going to be by yourself. You're going to have friends and family and the church, and you can do it. I just remember that so clearly. And so that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And then in terms of, something that happened that gave you some real hope and help was learning about Progress School.
Exactly. I went to a meeting, and I'm thinking it was a meeting of church women. And in that group was a woman named Gail Salzman. She was the wife of a minister, and she had a big heart. And she talked about Progress School, which she had started for special needs children. And I got so excited. I would say by then Laura was 3, and I wouldn't have sent her to a regular preschool with the seizures and all of our issues. But Gail, I sat down and talked to Gail after she spoke, and she said, you bring that girl to me. This is exactly what this is for, somebody like Laura. And I have a picture of her at school surrounded by the teachers, and Progress School was a beautiful place.
Yeah, it helped her and helped you.
Exactly. I think I started taking a class at Millikan because I had some respite.
Yeah.
And of course, then that was before the laws changed and said that the public schools had to provide special needs kids with classes. So then she switched to Sunnyside School, and she had George Batson as a principal at Sunnyside.
and at one point reached out in kind of desperation, and the school psychologist came to see you.
Laura was bubbly and happy, but as she got older, she started doing things that would just drive us nuts. She would flip the switch to the light fixtures on and off and on and off and on and off. That doesn't sound too serious, but those were little behaviors.
Yeah.
We played records. She wanted to get into the record player. We watched TV. She wanted to turn the TV on and off. She didn't want to sit still at meals. I was stressed, and I really smacked her one day, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to get help. So I called Gail. I called Progress, and Gail sent out a young man who was a psychologist, and he observed us and pointed out to us that we were responding to her inappropriate behaviors rather than her appropriate behaviors. So I learned about positive reinforcement, and we all did. And to this day, Becky and I will laugh a little bit about saying, good sitting and good eating, Laura. We learned how to do that. And I also learned about timeout. And those two things just pretty much saved our lives.
Yeah. A lot of family members pitched in.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and were kind of part of her care, and part of giving you some relief.
Exactly. We went to Grandma Spires for Sunday dinners after church. Grandma didn't go to church, but she would prepare meals. And we were all invited, and Rex had a big family. And after our meals, we would sit around the table and play Yahtzee or cards. We did birthdays at Grandma's. We would gather. We had a church group that became very close, like the Marshalls and the Hoppers and Norma Buckles, and the Adeles were part of that. We would get together and have picnics, and they would include Laura, and the guys would play basketball, and Laura loved to get over there and try to throw the basket, and she'd be coy again. She'd hold on to the ball, so everybody'd say, Laura, make a basket, and she'd look around, and finally she'd throw the ball. So yeah, we were included in family, and we were included with friend groups.
And then on a more formal basis, you got involved with an organization for the developmentally disabled, and that also brought you some.
It was wonderful. It was Macon County Association for Developmentally Disabled, MCAD. And not only did they have meetings for adults, they had a youth group that would volunteer and work with our kids. And one of the highlights was on Saturday morning, I would take Laura and Becky to the El Dorado Bowl, and Becky would work with the teenagers that were working with Laura and the other developmentally disabled kids. The moms would gather and we'd drink coffee in the coffee shop. So that was a great respite for the moms. We called ourselves the retarded mothers. And I would say that one of the benefits of having a child like Laura was that gathering of moms. I just learned that special needs kids came with rich and poor and black and white and every area of life. And we became great buddies. And of course, a lot of good, deep conversations about our lives and our many husbands left the families when they found out that their kids had issues, and I was so lucky. Rex was a great dad.
But then at one of these family gatherings, the tragedy struck.
Yeah. Rex's family was big, and as I said, we would all get together as families. And one of the nephew's father died, and we were having a potluck after the service. And Rex's older sister was kind of looking after the kids, and I was in the kitchen, and Liz came in and said, "I can't find Laura." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, I'll go look for her." At that point, she was 15, and I went upstairs, and I found her sitting on the floor in front of Jennifer's toy box. And the way she was sitting, she'd had a seizure, and her head went forward into the toy box and caught her neck, which cut off her windpipe. And so when I found her, I yelled for the others to call the 911, and I attempted to give her CPR, but I could tell that she had already vomited, and I think that's a final act when you can't get your breath. So the fire trucks got there quickly, and they made me leave the room. The ambulance came. I think they did a tracheotomy and didn't want me to see that, and they were getting all of her history and said, "Meet us at the hospital." And so we did, and the doctors came out and said, "We've done all we can do, that she hasn't lived." I wasn't terribly shocked because I knew that her life up to that point had been just one thing after another in terms of her having an accident, she had dropping seizures. My first thought was, oh, Laura won't have to have a seizure anymore. And yet, when we got home that night, I'd had a young baby child for 15 years in my lap. I told you I took a bath, and I realized I hadn't been in the bathtub by myself for years, because I always placed Laura in the bathtub with me because I couldn't have left her by herself because of the seizures. I was just really lost. Yeah. Physically, I missed her presence so badly. So it was a difficult grief situation. I was relieved, but I was terribly, terribly sad. Yeah. I look back and I wish that Rex and I had had grief counseling, but I wasn't smart enough to do that. So that was the hard part.
Well, her passing, as you described it, certainly made your house seem empty. But what's one thing about Laura that still always is a very positive memory that you have?
Well, she was, I don't know how she did it, but in spite of the seizures, she was good-natured. She always had a smile. She was very huggable, very lovable. And she didn't have conversation really, but I'll just never forget. She'd come home from school and it would be, "Hi, Mommy." So her laughter and her presence, and I feel like she enhanced our family tremendously.
thank you very, very much for
You're welcome.
sharing her.
Thanks.